Welcome to the Shema Podcast, the podcast for the perplexed, where Torah insights, intertwined through personal stories, as well as interviews with leading Torah scholars, demonstrate the empowering qualities of Torah and mitzvot. Now to the show.
Welcome back, my friends, to another episode of the Shema Podcast. Before we get into the episode, I want to share with you that at the encouragement of many, I have started recording video. This is new for me. I avoided it because the editing is much more complex. And quite frankly, the only way to do it is to avoid editing by thinking before I speak, something I get in reverse order quite often. So that means in order to take on this new endeavor of recording video, it will mean I need to do such. I think this will help me out in my marriage, because quite often, after 6 years of just doing audio and being able to edit out what I wish I had not said, I find myself in conversations with my wife to where I'll say something and then by looking at her expression, realizing that what I had said is something I wish I had not said, I'll tell her, hey, you know what, just edit out those last few sentences. And she'll say, Dan, this isn't a podcast. This is life. You can't do that. It's already been said. So I think this will help me out in all areas of my life. So to find these podcasts in video on YouTube, go to YouTube, search for Shema Podcast Show, and click the subscribe button. Now, the ideas I want to share today, as we are less than a week away from Pesach, my goal is to do another one discussing ideas around the Haggadah. But I wanted to first discuss exile. We need to be clear on what is exile and why is it necessary for creation. And as an important footnote, if you are new in your religious observance, or if you're not and need a reminder, Pesach is not about reflecting on something that happened over 3,300 years ago. It is about what is happening right now in your life. So we need to understand exile before we can understand redemption, because this is where we all find ourselves today. These are ideas that I was ruminating, contemplating over this last week. I was missing a vital component, and on Shabbos, I came in and grabbed a book by the Baal HaSulam that I had ordered, and I just flipped it open to an essay randomly and started reading. And of course, the missing component of what I was trying to understand was right there. Hashem always provides the solutions to a problem for us before we experience the problem. So I like to always start at the basic building blocks of creation for clarity, so that we can understand how this all applies in the complexity of the world and our lives. One of the things we've discussed on numerous occasions is that the building blocks of creation were the combinations of Hashem's concealment and his revelation. I'm going to give you some another way of looking at those two terms. And this is what I learned in the text by the Baal HaSulam. And that is that when Hashem first decided to create another in order to bestow goodness to the other, the first thing he had to create, something that was separate from him, was the desire to receive. Because the desire to receive is not part of who Hashem is. So this was clearly something separate from him. But here is the paradox. In order to come close to Hashem, to receive the goodness, we have to align ourselves to be like Hashem. It is likeness that brings connection. It is difference that brings distance. It's like two people in a relationship when they love the same thing and hate the same things. That is what brings them closer together. So in order for this other being to be in existence by having a will to receive is the reason why he created these 4 parallel worlds. One is from the area of the Sitra Achra, which is to receive, and the other is from Gadot, from holiness, with the will to bestow. Our body comes from the realm of the Sitra Achra. It is built and designed to have the will to receive, infused with our neshama that has the will to bestow. And through this conflict, in this turmoil, that is what rectifies the neshama. And this also explains why an infinite internal creator could not create everything in perfection on day one. He could create the environment, all the other creatures, angelic beings, the animals and insects, the physical world, the heavenly world, all these things he created instantaneously. But when it comes to creating us to be in his image, it is something that he could only give us the tool set to do, but then it is up to us to build ourselves into the image of God. That is why he had to give us some time, because we're not infinite internal creators. We needed time in order to do this. The entire Torah is a story, a pattern of exile and redemption. Exile and redemption. And it is in the exile, or another way of using a different term, in his concealment, that is where we can do our work. That is when we are granted the opportunity to let Hashem's light into the world. Now, you hear things like light quite a bit. Let's define that. No one knows how to emit photo beams from their eyes, like Superman. It's like, what does that mean? Well, now we have clarity on that. It means that in the absence of Hashem's revelation, when it's concealed, that we can be in a state of giving, in bestowing goodness. It's hard. After I did the podcast episode with Rebbetzin Freeman, and she talked about the near-death experiences and what they all had in common, Jew and non-Jew, through their life reviews, was the acts of kindness, the way we make other people feel. That was like the spiritual currency. How did you make other people feel. And I'm sure you were like me, very inspired by that. And I went out and really focused on the words I'm using. Am I uplifting those that I'm speaking with? Am I giving them a positive feeling? And I was on a roll with it. And it felt good. I knew what my purpose was. But one morning I woke up with my lower back spasming. If you ever had that before, it's painful. Standing up is painful. Walking is painful. Going up and down the stairs, excruciating. It's very difficult. And in that pain that my body was experiencing, it brought me into a very selfish state, a state of concealment. And after a few hours that morning, hobbling around the house, my wife comes downstairs. She gets on to me about something. We were in the kitchen. More than likely it was I had not loaded the dishwasher properly. In all fairness to her, we've been married 22 years. I still throw things in, not really thinking about what I'm doing. She has every right to be frustrated that I still don't take the time to actually put everything in a proper order. But in that state of pain, I was so selfish, such a selfish state, a state of receiving, that when I wasn't receiving, I spoke to her in a not friendly way. And she looked at me, upset, went upstairs. I realized what I had done, and I went upstairs, hobbled upstairs. And I apologized to her. And she said, what's going on with you? Because I had one hand on my lower back and one hand holding the dresser. And I said, my lower back is in great pain right now. And she said, what'd you do to cause that? And I said, I didn't do anything. Hashem did it. And I told her about the episode with Rebbetzin Freeman, what I've been working on. And I said, Hashem just gave me a test to see if I could, in a state of pain, still respond to the world around me in a state of giving, or whether I'd revert back to a state of receiving. And I said, I didn't pass the test. And she laughed. It's like, no, you did not pass that test. And Hashem wasn't doing that to throw that in my face. He was trying to bring some clarity to me on my potential. That's what he's always trying to do, to show us our potential, what we can grow to, what we can become, really who we are at a spiritual level, but what we need to bring out into this world. And what forges us to be in his image is when we have that resistance to the physical body and the Yetzer Hara that we have to push through. When you look at all the stories of our forefathers, when you read those stories, to read those stories like these are other people, I don't think is as productive as it can be, but instead to place yourself in their situation. Whenever one of the greats in the Torah make a mistake, it gets amplified, like really amplified to show us that. Like the famous one is Reuven, when he's accused of committing adultery with one of his father Yaakov's other wives. And then when you read that, you're like, what? But then you read the commentary in the Midrash, Oral Torah, those sources, like, no, he didn't sleep with his stepmother. No, he moved her bed and he swapped out the beds of his mother with another one. But when you amplify that action, he interfered with his father's conjugal relationships with one of his wives. The amplification of that is adultery. But that's how he treats people at such high levels, and to give us lessons. But when you don't hear critiques, that tells you quite a bit. It tells you who these people really are and what we're supposed to mirror as far as their behavior. So you can look at all of them, but we'll focus on the story of Yosef because that is the story that led to the exile in Egypt. He started off his father's favorite. You know, he was the crown jewel in his father's eye. He was positioned in a very favorable place. But he had to develop himself. Hashem had to help him develop himself. So one of the first things that happens in the narrative is he gets thrown into a pit. Hashem has to throw him down, literally, figuratively, into a place of concealment, of exile. And he gets sold to the Arabs, and he notices the sweet-smelling incense that they are transporting, and there he is shackled, being transported into slavery, and he focuses on the positive. And because he stayed true to who he was, and he showed gratitude to Hashem for every little thing that he could see that Hashem was doing for him. And he knew everything is for the best. Everything Hashem's doing is for the best. He ends up quickly moving into a very prominent position as the head of Potiphar's household. He is now in redemption. But there's much further growth. You know, he has this test with Potiphar's wife. And you have to really contemplate the gravity of this and really what it means. First, you know, the Torah says he was an extremely good-looking, handsome young man. Why is that material? Because people who are very attractive are at risk of becoming arrogant. And when someone becomes arrogant, they think they are entitled to things in this world. They go more into a state of receiving. And it makes people, men especially, more prone to violating the bris milah. To become arrogant is one of the things that leads to a man erring in this area. And Potiphar's wife was very attractive. So if you can just imagine, he's a teenager, a good-looking young man. His beautiful wife, Potiphar, the wife of Potiphar is very beautiful, and she's trying to seduce him day in and day out. He has teenage hormones going through his system. His body, again, like all of ours, comes from the Sitra Achra, the will to receive. What is the sexual impulse pulling someone to do? To have the will to receive this pleasure that doesn't serve a purpose. And so with all that against him, I mean, this is the core of a human being, is this urge. And he was able, day in and day out, to fight this. In the end, he was about to give up, but that's when Hashem stepped in. And what was his reward for basically avoiding going into the will to receive? What was his reward for accomplishing this task? A great task, a tremendous test. The reward was to go to the next level, the next test. He goes into a prison. I forget how many years he was in that prison. Should have done my homework. I'll look it up right now. See here, maybe you have to do a little editing. Long was. So he was in a prison for 12 years. But here is the way he behaved. He was focused on a will to bestow. He was constantly thinking about the needs of the other prisoners. This elevated him in the eyes of the guards, and he sort of ran the prison. But he lived in there for 12 years. Now, many would, in that state, being thrown in prison for 12 years, being innocent, would have gotten to a dark place of, this is totally unfair. Why is this happening to me? They would have gotten angry, very selfish. But he did not do that. He stayed in a will to bestow. He focused on the needs of others. And that is why the cupbearer and the baker, when he saw they were despondent, he went over to console them and asked them, what he could do to help, which led to him interpreting their dreams. But he was not giving in order to receive. He was giving to give. And after that 12 years of refining that quality and making just who he was, no matter what the condition, no matter what the concealment, again, most of us by default, we get into a place of concealment where we're lacking something like personal freedom, or we're lacking anything in life, we get into a state of receiving and getting upset. Why don't I have this? Why don't I have that? That is not how we let Hashem's light into the world. We let Hashem's light in the world when he conceals himself, when we go into our exiles during our life, which happens up and down throughout the year. And in those moments, stay into a state of having a will to bestow. Very challenging, but this is what we are meant to do. This is what it means to be a light in the nations. This is what it means to shine light in darkness, is to stay in a state of the will to bestow, to give. And so after he goes through that and he trains himself, that becomes who he is, then he is ready to be the viceroy of Egypt, giving what tasks? To provide the food for the entire world. He was in a place through his desire to bestow goodness to those around him. Hashem placed him in that position. He gave him the resources to fulfill his desire to give. Now, I'll be honest with you, sometimes I've gotten a little frustrated with the fact that my tzedakah doesn't immediately come back to me many times over like it used to. And I realized that at the early stages, what Hashem was teaching me is give to receive. And that's fine. That's a good starting point. But the next step is giving to just give. Can you just to give without something in return? Does it have to be transactional? Is Hashem transactional? No. That's why he needed to move me to a different level of not having instantaneous ATM status relationship with him, where I, put in $100 and the next day $2,000 came out. That was training, but it was not the end. It was a means to an end to help me develop my potential and all of our potential to be in the image of God, which means to be in a state of desire to bestow, desire to give. And now we can begin to make sense of why the Jews had to enter into Egypt. They had to go into this long area of concealment. But the Jews have fallen to the 49th level of impurity. Many were engaged in idolatry. The one thing they did was keep themselves separate from the other nations. And so and this is why at Mount Sinai, the revelation came from above. And it's also why the revelation from above, the redemption, did not hold. It was not intended to hold, because it doesn't hold when it comes from above. That's why the Jewish people could not hear all the mitzvos directly from Hashem. Their neshama, who wanted the will to bestow, couldn't stay in a body that was unrefined and still in a state of will to receive. That's why they kept separating, and the Jews kept dying when they heard the first two mitzvos. And it led to them sinning with the golden calf. Before the golden calf, but backing up to the point to where they said, we will do, and then we'll hear. At that point, they received their two crowns, which means the Yetzer Hara was pulled from within the Jewish people. There was no more death. Anyone who was sick was healed. If they were blind, they could see. If they're missing a limb, they now had a limb. Because the impediment of their neshama really infusing their physical body and perfecting the physical body, that was removed. And you can see, but what they said, we will do and we will hear, which means when Hashem is concealed, when we were in a state of exile in our lives, that we will do what Hashem wants regardless. We don't need to sit there and say, if I do this for you, Hashem, what's in it for me? We find ourselves doing that, like many of us do. I do. And that's the mindset we have to escape from. And that's why the final exile, this very long one, is so necessary, because we have to initiate it from below this time. That's why the last holiday of the year is Purim, because we committed to the Torah, and we initiated it from below. That's why it'll be the only remaining holiday when Mashiach comes. So that is the purpose of exile. That is our opportunity to forge ourselves. It's easy to be kind and think about others when you are feeling great. It's easy to give tzedakah when you have lots of money and you're wealthy. But to do those things, to act selfishly, to want to just have the desire to give even when you're lacking, that's in the image of God. And that's what our task is. So I want to, with that in mind, share some things to really contemplate before we get to Pesach. And everything I'm saying to you, I'm saying to myself. That's why I do these podcasts. I'm talking to myself. Stop and think about everything that you are currently worrying about. Okay, think about everything you worry about. And then once you've identified those things, I want you to now phrase that correctly, is that what you worry about is what you fear. And what you fear is something other than Hashem. Let's just be honest with ourselves, because this is the exile, and this is what we want to free ourselves from. And whenever you hear in the Haggadah Pharaoh, you need to know who your pharaohs are. The Jews in Egypt thought Pharaoh had power. They were dependent on Pharaoh for food. And that's why Hashem needed to create the illusion that he had power, so he in front of their eyes could, remove that illusionary power around Pharaoh, so the Jews could see that Hashem is the only power. So we go through this every year, but during the year we get caught up. not accusing you, but I suspect most of us, where we assign power to other things, because if not, we wouldn't be worried about anything. We'd only have fear of Hashem. And fear of Hashem is freedom. And I want to explain what that means. But again, first, identify who your Pharaohs are, who you have assigned power to, so you can remove that and assign all power to its rightful source, which is Hashem. There's another teaching by the Baal HaSulam. I heard this actually from Gadol Finster in his merit. I heard it, and it made me actually go buy that text. So that was sort of the cause and effect of some events that occurred, and how we all, as Jewish people, play off each other, and why it's so helpful for us to share with each other what we learn. But it's the 4 ways we can be stuck in exile. And when I heard this, I put it on a notes section of my phone. I have a little morning thought contemplations to go through to help me get my mind focused for the day. And I kept this one on there. And what the Baal HaSulam says is that, and he lists out the 4 things that can cause someone to be in exile, in Egypt, in Mitzrayim, exile in mental constriction. One is to not understand that Hashem is controlling everything around us. 2 is to not know that Hashem loves us. 3, to suspect that Hashem is mistreating us. And 4 is to not believe in ourselves. So again, when you look at our forefathers, and the reason we have the privilege to be Jews is because of them. And you can use any of their stories, but if you think about like Yosef, he had prophecy. Hashem said, as he was fleeing his home because Esau was out to kill him, Hashem said, I will be with you. I will take care of all your needs. What's the first thing that happens? He runs into Esau's son, who tries to kill him, and he bribes his way out by giving him every last penny he has. So now he's broke. He goes to Laban's home, broke, and now has to work for 7 years to marry Rachel, and ends up getting Leah. You know the rest of the story. He works for another 7 years. All this goes on. But you never hear Yosef complain and said, Hashem, I thought you said you were going to take care of me. He never complained once, because Yosef knew that Hashem is orchestrating everything, that Hashem loves him, and nothing he's doing is to mistreat him. Think about that story with Yosef as you go through this year and through life. That is what we're supposed to mirror, because to think otherwise gets us trapped in the mental exile of Mitzrayim. But the 4th one, to believe in yourself. I think a lot of us struggle with that when I'm talking to others. I want you to imagine, if you're a parent, you can really do this. If you're a mother, you'll be an expert at this exercise. But imagine you're a young child. They're grown up now. They're a young, adolescent, teenager, and you found out that someone said something hurtful to them. It hurt them really bad. They're crying. Someone made them not believe in themselves, that how special they are, how unique they are, and how that they have such a unique, special purpose in this world. And they're crying and they're upset. And you as a parent, you're hurt. You're hurt to see them hurt. Moms get this. Something happened like that with my daughter when she entered middle school. I think it happens with a lot of girls, especially in the secular world. Probably one of the reasons my daughter wanted to get out of there and go to a Jewish day school. But my wife went mama bear big time. Like I literally had to like keep her from leaving the house. Like she wasn't safe for society. It was like someone said something to hurt her little girl. Now, I want you to consider the following. After thinking about the pain that caused you when someone said something hurtful to an innocent little child, many of us are in a verbally abusive relationship. And that verbally abusive relationship is the relationship we have with ourselves. It's like a script for a Lifetime movie. I mean, sometimes when I talk to people and they're down and the way they talk about themselves, I'm not good enough for this. I can't do this. I can't find a wife, or I can't, find a job or whatever. And the way they talk about themselves, it's verbally abusive. And I want you to think about how that makes Hashem feel, knowing item number 2, he loves you. It hurts him to not believe in yourself. For one, you can't accomplish what you were set in this world to accomplish, and it hurts him. So if you love Hashem, you have to love yourself. And get rid of this verbally abusive relationship you may have with yourself. That's key here. So my friends, I hope those ideas are helpful at getting you ready for Pesach. Understand your exile. You have to go in there knowing, where am I? How am I being kept captive? Which, of course, we're doing it to ourselves. It's all mental exile. Who else are you assigning power to? Who else do you fear? That's your Pharaoh when you go in. You are going to liberate yourself and assign all that fear to just fear of Hashem. Why is that freedom? Because of number 2, he loves you. The only one you should fear is the one that loves you more than a parent has ever loved a child by 1,000,000 times. That's freedom. The only one you have to fear is the one that loves you more than anyone that's possible to love someone. That is freedom. To know that everything that is happening, he is doing out of total love, because he knows that you have potential and he needs you to forge yourself into the image of Hashem. And again, how do you do that? That you work towards being in a state of bestowing, of giving. And when does that greatest opportunity to really make that happen for yourself? Is it when time and everything's going great? No. It's when he conceals himself, when you are in a personal exile throughout the year. In that moment, that is your opportunity. That's our opportunity to stay and be in a state of giving. That is when it concretizes us moving in that direction. And then also to love yourself. You're not going to help out anyone in the world by being verbally abusive to yourself. You're unique, you're special, you are a necessary piece of the puzzle of creation. We can never forget that. It's not humility to do that. Humility is knowing all the resources that Hashem gave you and being appreciative of all those resources, but knowing that all those resources came from Hashem. So I hope that was helpful, my friends. Hopefully, God willing, later this week, I will share some ideas of the Haggadah, things to contemplate as we move forward into Pesach and we experience our own redemption. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you for listening, and if you enjoyed the episode and found it meaningful, please take a moment to rate, review, and share the podcast. To share feedback, suggest future topics, or ask questions for the host or his guests, you can email him at shemapodcastshow@gmail.com. That is shemapodcastshow@gmail.com, or click the show notes to join the growing WhatsApp community.